So JPMorgan just put out a report that says that CBDCs can save firms $100 billion a year in cross-border costs. The report estimates that nearly $24 trillion in wholesale payments move across borders each year, and banks incur more than $120 billion in total transaction costs. And this excludes potential hidden costs in trapped liquidity and delayed settlements. And the report specifically looks at the ASEAN region, which stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So it includes Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, which operates across a diverse set of 10 currencies and contributes 7% of global cross-border trade. So it's an interesting spin on CBDCs, this time looking at it from the perspective of a bank and savings that can be made. Generally, we're looking at it from the perspective of a government and kind of the terrifying programmability that might come as a result. But there is, of course, a flip side to that, in that cryptocurrency can potentially be a more efficient method of transferring funds. Now, it really depends on the on the central bank digital currency, which tends to not be a real cryptocurrency. So we can dive into all of those details. I'm going to throw this to the group. David, I think I saw your hand go up in the studio.
Yeah, so I really like this. I think we'll get into the distinction between crypto and CBDCs and some important stuff there. But just to kind of set the table for why this matters, it's not just for central banks, but also for businesses doing a lot of international transfers. Right now, the way this often works for companies that have to do really high-speed moves across borders is what's called correspondent banking, which often involves tying up a lot of money by having banks in two different places that you can then kind of transfer without moving the money, which takes so much time. And so there's cost savings here implicitly for not just the central banks themselves, but for companies. And I think it's a really great thing to keep in mind when we talk about CBDCs. And some of the downsides from a retail perspective is that as infrastructure, they definitely do have huge potential compared to something like SWIFT, which is, SWIFT is the retail version, but the way that banks work now, there's some real upside potential.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, you want to?
Jen?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Naomi,
how do we do the transfer when we're actually here in the same room together?
I know. You're going to have better peripheral vision to see the hands going up beside you.
Naomi, I actually had a question for you on this. I mean, we're talking about CBDs for international settlements and international payments. And when I was reading the story, I was like, okay, this makes sense, but doesn't it make more sense for businesses and individuals who want to make these types of payments to just use a crypto and get rid of that intermediary like we've spoken about so much on this show? I'd just love to hear your perspective.
I would say absolutely. But obviously governments aren't thinking that way because cryptocurrencies don't allow them control, and central bank digital currencies allow them complete control and a lot more control than they currently have. So obviously the governments are only going to be exploring on that side of things. And that means that whatever the government's exploring, the banks are exploring, because there are such tight regulations around the banking industry. You've got to grease so many palms to be able to open your branches, your cross state lines, all of that stuff. So they really toe the line when it comes to what the government wants. So I don't see them going against the government anytime soon and saying, oh, we are just going to, accept Bitcoin and Dash and Zcash, heaven forbid. Like, they're never going to do that. So I think the conversation is always going to be centered around central bank digital currencies. But Zach, I'll throw to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to say, when the banks stand to make a lot of money here, this could be the most compelling case for a CBDC rollout for a lot of countries worldwide. I mean, I think this does speak to the efficiencies that some of these bigger corporate giants are seeing in a CBDC future. And it would be interesting to see if they ramped up their messaging around that as a way to move money over borders. There is the possibility that some CBDCs could run on open networks. I think a lot of that is to be determined. We've seen, I think Ukraine was doing a pilot with Stellar to put its CBDC on that network. There are other efforts. There are other public blockchain projects that are talking with people about maybe doing some sort of CBDC integrations. But, the jury is still out on that. I mean, there is likelihood that it will not run on these open networks. And I think that would be detrimental to the digital asset ecosystem. But time will tell. It'd be interesting to see where these coins ultimately end up riding on. But yeah, the fact that a banking major here with JPMorgan is saying, hey, this could save big financial institutions a lot of money in terms of getting fiat currency back and forth between different countries, I think that's going to potentially open the eyes of some regulators and central bankers the world over. So this one might be a sneakily big story that might otherwise be missed. But I'll toss it back to you, Naomi.
Yeah, I have such a big question pop up in my mind when you say that CBDCs can potentially be on open networks, because theoretically they totally can. But I have a lot of trouble understanding how that's a central bank digital currency. If it's an open network, it's inherently not controlled by the central bank. I would presume it would be controlled the same way that other cryptos are. You would need, consensus among the entire ecosystem. The whole point of a central bank is to control the money supply. So at that point, what is even the point of a central bank? And second of all, how would it be considered a central bank digital currency and not just a cryptocurrency? So it's we're kind of figuring out terminology here, and I think we've still got a lot of work to do.